Yes.
I'm here as an independent voter who appreciates very much Beto coming to the Northeast Texas Panhandle to visit us. Very seldom do we have politicians in statewide races take the time to come here, and he could read the election results as well as we know them to be, and he's chosen to take his time to come here. I don't know a whole lot about him, more than probably you did. Of course, he came close to becoming elected as senator, and I started paying attention to what happened afterwards. He went on a trip debating about whether to run for president or not, and he came up through the Texas Panhandle into Oklahoma and Colorado, Kansas, and he wrote letters that were posted on the internet. And I think his wife, who's here today, edited those as he was traveling. And it gave a very interesting perspective of a person who's wanting to get out into the district and meet people and see what they were thinking. So thank you again, candidate, for coming to this area.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
First of all, I wanted to just say thank you to Otis for coming down to introduce me and for the kind words that you just shared about public service and the fact that you're here, and probably I hope everyone is here, not to support a candidate or because you belong to one party or the other, but because you care about the future of this community and of this state and of this country, and you want to have a say in that, and you want to help guide us, all of us together, in a positive direction, as you see that direction. And that's what this democracy is all about. And I'm grateful just that you're here. And as the sheriff said, you may be a Republican, you may be a Democrat, you may be an independent like Otis. That does not matter to me. No me importa, as we say in El Paso. Just the fact that you're here, that you're my fellow Texan, my fellow American, my fellow human being, that's really what counts at the end of the day. So grateful for you all coming out today. So thank you for being here. I also want to thank Sheriff Clapp for the fact that he's here, for his public service to this community, to our state, and to our country. My Uncle Raymond was a sheriff's deputy in El Paso, Texas. In fact, he was the jail captain at the El Paso County Jail. And so we know in our family and the O'Rourke family just how important this public service is, how dangerous and essential this job is, and how grateful we are to those in law enforcement who are willing to put their lives on the line to protect the safety of our communities and to ensure that we have the security that far too many of us take for granted. And I love what he said at the beginning, that he doesn't care about anybody's political persuasion. He just wants to make sure that we're able to realize this democracy here in this room, because it's not something that just happens. The fact that we can have these peaceful conversations or freely and fairly decide who's going to represent us or who's going to serve as the next governor of the great state of Texas. Men and women have put their lives on the line. Many have lost their lives to guarantee these freedoms that we are now exercising right here in this room. They did it in uniform in 1944, crossing the channel, landing on those beaches in Normandy, fighting fascism half a world away to defend democracy at home. They did it right here in America, marching and standing up for their rights to vote, regardless of the color of their skin or any other difference between us. We have inherited their sacrifice, their struggle, and their service, and what we do with it, I think, will define not only those of us here today in this room and Canadian, but our country and this state of Texas going forward. So we are grateful that you're here. Someone asked, why in the world, Beto, are you in Canadian Texas? We, in 2018, as Otis mentioned, ran for the United States Senate. In fact, we started that race in 2017. We ran it for about 2 years, and as you all know, we visited every single one of the 254 counties of Texas. And you can check the public record. I'm not just going to say this because I'm in Canadian right now, but when asked, and Amy can remind me, we were in Houston or Austin or San Antonio or somewhere, and someone said, what has been your favorite part of Texas? And I've told people it was Canadian Texas. We rolled in, and Amy, it was at the summer of 2018, and it either just stayed or about to go stay in Palo Duro Canyon, where we slept under the stars after seeing the Texas show that night. and came into Canadian, and we're here to witness the most beautiful sunset that I've ever seen in my life. We were staying at the Arrington Ranch House, which we later learned was featured in the movie Castaway. Had a great dinner that night with some wonderful people who may not have voted for me in that Senate race, but were so incredibly kind and welcoming and generous, and it really distinguished this community in our minds. The physical beauty of it, the kindness of the people, the fact that we can be on the other side of the political divide and still be kind and compassionate to one another, that's pretty special. And you all exemplify that here in this community. So we could not literally wait to get back. And though it's a little bit different in March than it was when we were here in the summer, it's still just as beautiful to us. And we're grateful to you all for coming out. A couple of thoughts I have. The question is, if we are to win this race against the odds and the fact that there hasn't been a Democrat elected governor in the state of Texas in 32 years, Ann Richards was the last to pull off this feat. And I guarantee you she was probably here in Canadian campaigning for your votes or the votes of your parents or grandparents back in 1990. If we're to win, what will we do? And I wanted you to hear it directly from me, because there will be others who will say, Beto might do this and Beto will do that. Here are the things that I'm focused on that I hope you agree with. And if you don't, I also want to hear that as well. Number one, I want to make sure that the best jobs created anywhere in the United States of America are found right here in the state of Texas. Jobs which, if you work them, pay enough so that you don't need to work a second or third job just to make ends meet. Right now in the state of Texas, 4 out of 10 working Texans don't make a living wage. That means they work that additional shift or that additional job. That means very often they're on public assistance, which all of us together collectively end up paying for. And in some extreme circumstances, they're not able to sleep in the same home night after night. They're in shelters or out on the streets. You know that because you've seen those who are experiencing homelessness. We know that because we met them, listened to them, and talked to them. And you might be surprised how many of them are holding down a job while they don't have a home to go to. I want to make sure that we are competitive for small business entrepreneurs, the mom and pop shops that we have in Canadian, that we have in my hometown of El Paso. I want to make sure that we have every ability to succeed. I want to make sure that we wire our communities for the internet and that we have broadband in every single part of this county, every single part of this community. Because whether you're ranching, whether you're farming, whether you're in the energy business, you need to be able to get online to be successful, to find employees to hire, to get your goods to market, to be able to finish your education, for the single women and men in the audience to be able to find a date to connect with tonight. The internet helps us in all those things, and we take it for granted in too many parts of this state that are wired, namely the big cities, but we forget all too often that there are parts of Texas that still do not have the ability to get online. In 2018, I happened to come to Silverton, Texas, and I was talking about how important it is to wire the 50% of rural Texas that is not online. And this man stood up and he said, "Hey, Beto, I was in the first grade in 1936 when then Congressman Lyndon Baines Johnson worked with then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt on something called the Rural Electrification Administration. Prior to that, we didn't have electricity in Silverton, Texas. And so when I was doing my homework at the end of a school day, I had to do it before the sun went down. But after LBJ met us halfway, and we formed our own co-op in Silverton, and the REA made sure that we were wired for light, I could read under electric candle just like the kids in Dallas or New York or Tokyo. And he said, you know what? It made me feel like I was important, like I was destined to do something big in my life. And that was government not giving us a handout, but partnering with us and meeting us halfway. When I'm governor, I want to make sure that we meet these communities halfway, that we're the partner for Canadian or Silverton or any community across this state to make sure that you have what you need to keep young people here, to attract talent and investment, and to make sure that we're creating the jobs that are going to drive the success of this community. So that's point number one. We want great jobs. Point number two, I want to make sure that we have the best possible public schools in America, in cities just like this one. And I just met a young man who's in the 8th grade here, who was telling me about going to school here in Canadian, Texas. I told him my daughter is in 8th grade back in El Paso. And I want to tell you, regardless of your county or your zip code or your income or any other difference between us, you should be able to count on a world-class education in the state of Texas. If we don't do that, and right now, unfortunately, we are not doing that, we're going to have a really hard time creating the workforce that can compete for those jobs that we want to create here in Texas. We're going to have a hard time creating more of those jobs because we won't have the entrepreneurs that we need, and we're going to lose out to people coming to this state from other parts of the country. And let me make the point on this case. 7 out of 10 fourth graders in the average classroom in the state of Texas cannot read at grade level today. It makes it harder for them to ultimately graduate from high school, harder for them to get post-secondary education. That can be a 4-year degree, a 2-year associate's degree, a welding certification, working at the IBEW Electricians Training Hall to get your apprenticeship and eventually your journeyman's certification. Whatever you need to have the skills to earn that living wage, it becomes harder if we're not teaching you at the age when you can first learn to read, which, as you know, by the way, is not 4th grade, it's not 3rd grade, it's not even kindergarten. We need to make sure that we have preschool for every kid in every community, in every county across the state of Texas. When I'm governor, we're going to make investments in things like preschool. We're going to make investments in things like community college so that cost is no object to getting the training you need to be able to compete for those jobs. And we're going to recognize that the teachers right here in the Hemp Hill School District are making $9,000 a year less than the average teacher across this country. $9,000 less means that all too often those teachers as well are working a second job, sometimes a 3rd job to make ends meet and to support their habit of educating our kids in that classroom. I want to make sure that we have the backs of those teachers so that they stay in this profession, so we can recruit more of them to join their ranks, and so that we're producing the best possible educated workforce in the country right here in Texas. So that's point number 2, world-class education. My 3rd and last one. It's really hard to work or to create a job. It's really hard to finish your education if you're not healthy enough or well enough to do so. We happen to live in the least insured states. There are more going without the ability to see a doctor or fill a prescription or see a mental health care provider than in any other state in the union. And all too often in Texas, we have folks dying of diabetes, of the flu, of curable cancers in the year of our Lord, 2022. But there's an answer to this. And Oklahoma, our friends to the north, New Mexico, Louisiana, Arkansas, every bordering state has done this, and it's time that we follow their lead. And it's called Medicaid Expansion. It means the federal government pays 90 cents on the dollar to bring more people onto the Medicaid, see that doctor or fill that prescription, so that we attract and retain more doctors, more nurses, more mental health care providers, so that we no longer have the largest provider of mental health care in the Texas being the county jail system in the state of Texas right now. Now, investing in mental health care, investing in health care for all Texans, you might think that's expensive, the way that we're doing now. When someone who has schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or clinical depression who's untreated and cannot get care and sometimes will get arrested on purpose to be taken to the county jail, which is the one place they're guaranteed some level of care. When that happens, not only are the outcomes for them not going to be as good, but it's going to be far more expensive for each of us because as the local county taxpayer, we're footing the bill to keep that person behind bars instead of paying a fraction of that cost to ensure that they have insurance in the state of Texas. So that's the 3rd idea, just making sure that more people can see a doctor so more of us are well enough, healthy enough to live to our full potential, pursue our promise, do whatever we were placed on this planet to perform in the first place. Those are the 3 big ideas. Great health care, world-class schools, and the ability to find a job that pays. At a time that this state, this country, is so divided, so fractured, so polarized, so many people pitted against one another, made to fear or even hate each other, I hope that we can bring Texas together, united around these 3 big ideas. Who's going to argue the point on jobs, on schools, and the ability to see a doctor? There are going to be plenty of things that we're going to disagree on. Even if we're in the same party, even if Amy and I have been married for 17 years, we live in the same house. No two people will agree on every issue all the time. But let us begin where we find common ground. And those three issues, I think, can get it done. Last thing, and then I'm going to turn this microphone over to you and listen to what you have to say. There are some unique opportunities in rural Texas, and I'm looking forward to hearing about those from you. But here are some that I've heard from your neighbors in surrounding counties. One, it really hurt us when the governor vetoed the Universal Service Fund, which subsidizes rural telephone and rural internet. It means that some of your telephone and internet bills have gone up between $25 to $100 a month every single month. And that's on top of the inflation that we're seeing at the grocery store and the gas pump. As governor, I'm going to restore funding to the Universal Service Fund. The other is a permanent university fund. As you all know, what the state of Texas does is it extracts the wealth and the value of the minerals that are underneath the land right here in Canadian Texas and throughout the Panhandle, and then sends that to the University of Texas and Texas A&M. And listen, we have nothing against the Longhorns or the Aggies. We want them to be successful. But UT now has the largest endowment of any public university in the United States of America. And that endowment is funded on the wealth that is literally right underneath our feet here in Canadian Texas. As governor, I want some of these resources to stay in the Panhandle, to fund access to higher education right here in this community, to make it more affordable for your sons and daughters, your grandsons and your granddaughters. And last thing, the reason that I'm here is to prove the point that we can take no voter for granted. We can write no part of the state off. Listen, I got all of 11% of the vote here in this county in 2018. And I'm proud of that because in the previous midterm, the Democratic candidate got 9%. So we moved up 2 points. But it doesn't matter if you vote for me or you don't vote for me. If we get 12% next time or something less, you're important to me. And if I'm your governor, I have a responsibility to serve you and to deliver for you. And I have no hope of successfully doing that if I haven't shown up first to listen to you, to find out what's on your mind, for you to set our expectations, and for me to try to meet them when I'm in this position of public trust. So thank you for coming out today. Looking forward to hearing what's on your mind. Very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you. This is Miss Cynthia Cano. She's got a disinfectant wipe, so she's wiping this microphone down after everyone uses it, just out of an abundance of caution.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I'm Bobette Derry, and I'm one of the representatives for the Panhandle for Silver-Haired Legislature.
Wonderful.
So we speak for older Texans and the concerns of older Texans. Points, we're trained to remember 3 points by our preachers. so thank you for that. But one of the concerns we have is I tried to vote by mail. And this envelope came in with 2-point type packed in there. It was hard to read, it was confusing. Senate Bill 1 has really caused older Texans problems with voting. And all the way from requiring a stamp, which some older people didn't have, to trying to understand how complex the business was of trying to vote and vote legally and not have your vote rejected. So my question is, what are your plans as governor to correct this problem?
Thank you for asking the question. Thank you for your service as part of the Silver-Haired Legislature here in the state. Thank you. You know, the numbers have now come in from the primary election, and it looks like 13% overall of those in Texas who've requested a ballot by mail had those ballots rejected. And these are folks who are citizens, who are eligible to vote, who voted by mail in almost every previous election, qualified to do so, but had their ballots rejected. And to bring everyone up to speed, the reason is last year, the Republican majority legislature and the governor passed and signed a bill into law that requires you, if you want to vote by mail, to use the same ID with which you originally used to register to vote, whether that was 2 years ago, 20 years ago, or 70 years ago. And a lot of people can't remember, and we don't blame them, how they registered to vote 70 years ago and what form of ID they used. I mentioned the service of those World War II veterans. One of those who had their ballot request rejected was a 95-year-old veteran who served this country in World War II overseas, fighting fascism, defending democracy at home 3 times. He requested that ballot. 3 times he was rejected. And I have no idea whether the guy is a Republican or a Democrat. And as the sheriff said earlier, that is unimportant. He has, more than any of us, earned the right to vote and to help decide the direction of this country, and it was rejected. So let's just assume the best out of anyone and everyone. And the Republican legislature and the governor did not intend for people not to be able to vote. How are we going to fix it? We're going to fix it by making sure that any eligible citizen in the state of Texas has no obstacle or barrier in place in order to cast their ballot. We're hearing back not only from older Texans, but those with disabilities who now have to prove ID, who, if they have an assistant helping them to sign that ballot, because maybe they physically cannot sign that ballot, that person has to prove ID as well. And it is enough of a hoop to jump through that some people are just saying, you know what, the heck with it, I'm not going to vote this year. And we can't have that in this proud democracy. Whoever you vote for and whatever moves you, whatever party you belong to, you should be able to have a voice in our politics, and your vote should be counted. So let's roll back SB 1. Whatever the intention of it, it is clearly disenfranchising our fellow Texans, and let's make it easier for people to vote while still making sure that we prevent fraud in this state. Thank you very much for asking. Yeah.
If you all raise your hand, I will come to you.
I kind of, this popped in my head off the back of that question. I feel like that voting's turned into voting year. I mean, I feel like we need to go back to, we have a day to vote, but not a month to vote. Or I was in the service, so I mean, I can relate to having the original intent of the absentee ballot was you were absent, from the country, or you were traveling or whatever. But it's all mishmash now. So I mean, how do you feel about that? It's kind of like on the opposite of what y'all are kind of talking about. But I'm just curious.
One of the things that I'm grateful for in Texas is that we do have early voting. Not every state does, and including some states controlled by Democrats. I don't know if New York and New Jersey, for example, have the kind of early voting we have. What makes it challenging in Texas, especially during the pandemic, was that we don't have no excuse vote by mail. You have to meet certain qualifications. You have to be 65 years or older. You have to have a disability. But there are many people who have underlying vulnerabilities who didn't want to vote in person, and I think should be allowed to vote by mail. I mean, we know that many people in elected office in this state and this country do it, and if it's good enough for them, I think it should be good enough for all of us. But I hear you. You would prefer that there's just one election day,
Or two,
or a couple of days.
It seems like every year it just gets stretched out longer and longer, and now we've got drop-off ballot boxes. People picking up
Right.
ballots, and it's getting just kind of out of hand.
I hear you. In some ways, though, Texas is still pretty restrictive.
Texas.
We're one of the only states where you cannot register to vote online. You have to do it through paper, in person, or at the courthouse, or have a sworn volunteer deputy registrar register you to vote. We are 46th in the country in voter turnout. We were 50th before 2018. And it's not because we're lazy, it's not because we don't love democracy. I think it's because it is unnecessarily onerous for people to get onto the rolls and to exercise that right to vote. And the other thing, and I hope Republicans and Democrats alike can agree with me on this one, we also have a problem. Democrats and Republicans do this, by the way, where members of Congress are choosing their own voters instead of the other way around. And so we have increasingly uncompetitive congressional districts where there's no contest in November in most of this state. And so there's fewer reasons for people to come out. And the reason that's so bad for all of us is when there's not a contest and you don't have that competition, then you go unrepresented. You don't have candidates like me in front of people like you making their case and being held accountable and having to answer tough questions. So I'd love to see greater competition. I'd love to see term limits for anybody who holds a position of public trust. And I'd love to see more voters get into our elections. I think that's only going to be good for all of us.
I see another party coming up, libertarians.
There you go. Ms. Connell's got a
Here
mic.
we
If you'll
go.
raise your
Here we
hand,
go.
she'll bring the microphone to you.
Thank you.
So I just had a couple of questions. Not a couple, I'll just take one, I guess. The first one being, especially in this area, we see a huge problem with the opioid crisis. It's a big deal here, to the fact that certain smaller towns in this area have been completely overrun by it. Now, as you know, as governor, what would you do to limit the opioid crisis, and how soon would we be able to see something like, you know, medicinal marijuana, or even at this point join everybody else and do recreational marijuana, because it's the tax dollars for it are, there's no argument against it.
Yeah.
I mean, is that something that you are looking forward to as governor, is being able to, you know, help small areas like this with the opioid crisis?
Yes, and I'm going to work with every member of law enforcement across this state and gain from their guidance and their experience and their wisdom on this. They know this issue better than any of us ever will. And so I want to make sure that we defer to them, or at least listen to them on this issue. But you've made the connection that I think is obvious to a lot of people who have struggled with addiction to opioids. And many of them that I've met along the way are veterans. I served for 6 years on the House Veterans Affairs Committee in Congress, and I cannot tell you how many veterans who served in Vietnam, came home with post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injury say, hey Beto, when I go to the VA, they can legally prescribe me an opioid, to which I can become, and maybe more likely than not, will become addicted, from which I might very well die, as have tens of thousands of Americans across this country. But the one thing that really alleviates my symptoms is marijuana. And if I purchase that or use that in the state of Texas, I'm a criminal in the eyes of the law. This state puts more people behind bars for possession of a substance that is legal in most of the rest of the country than any other state. And it costs us Texas taxpayers $500 million a year to do that. So if for no other reason than for those veterans who are having to make this difficult choice right now, we should absolutely legalize it for medicinal purposes. But then I would say we need to go further and beyond that and recognize that the rest of the country has already, by and large, legalized it. And why are we locking people up for having something that in almost every other part of the country they can legally hold, and paying higher property taxes and higher taxes to the state of Texas to do that? And we also, I think, can do a far better job of lessening the dependence on opioids in the state of Texas. Last thing that I would add to this is we do have a real problem in the trafficking of fentanyl and other addictive, illegal drugs that are coming into this country from Mexico. We need to do a far better job of stopping drug trafficking and human trafficking where our country meets the rest of the world. We need to partner with anyone, local sheriffs, local law enforcement, DPS in the state of Texas, and the federal government to get a handle on that. But I would argue that if marijuana were legal, we would stop having to focus on that and interdiction around that drug and focus on the things that are really harming and killing people in our communities right now. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it. Have a question over here.
Do I have to have a microphone?
No.
You don't have to have a microphone. You're good. And I'll repeat the question if we can't hear it.
Anyway, you've mentioned before about fully funding public schools and public ed, and I'm just also, you know, raising the salaries for teachers, and I'm just wondering how you're planning on restructuring school finance to make that viable when we're already strapped with our property taxes. We already are, you know, it's a lot. And I'm curious on how you plan to, you know, make that.
That's a great question, and just quickly to repeat it for anyone who didn't hear it, you know, I'm talking about fully funding our schools, raising teacher pay, and to be clear, I want to raise teacher pay in Hemphill ISD by $9,000 on average per teacher. That's a lot of money when you spread it out across the other 253 counties of Texas. How in the world can we afford this? So to jump on that last question, we'd save about $500 million a year if we stopped putting people behind bars for marijuana. We'd gain another $500 million a year if we taxed it in the same way that other states are taxing it when they have controlled sales of cannabis in those other states. So that's $1 billion to the positive. If we had some parity in how we gain property taxes from corporations, who can hire the big lawyers and the lobbyists to get out of their responsibility, and all of us end up shouldering more of that, I think we can gain $3 to $5 billion additional that comes from corporations and not from homeowners and not from renters in the state of Texas. And then the last thing is, over the last 20 years, the state of Texas has paid a smaller and smaller share of public ed. And it means the local property taxpayer, and I'm one of them in El Paso, Texas, has paid a larger and larger share. If your bill is like mine, the largest part of my tax bill in El Paso is the El Paso Independent School District. The county, the city, the hospital district, the community college district, all pale in comparison to what I'm paying to that ISD. As governor, I'm going to work with Republican and Democratic legislators alike to increase the state's share of that funding, because as we know in many of these communities, the ISD is the largest employer. It is the best ticket for success for these young people. And I would argue after 2 years of the pandemic, where many of these young people have lost grandparents or their parents have lost their jobs, it's really a lifeline for these kids. And I want to make sure that it is fully funded. It's hard for me to think of a more important responsibility for the state of Texas outside of public safety than the education of our young people. And we can't say that without backing it up with the resources. So the billion from legalizing marijuana, the $3 to $5 billion from fixing our property tax code so that corporations pay their fair share, and then looking at our other priorities in the budget, we can have the resources to make sure that we have the backs of public educators here in the Panhandle and across the state of Texas.
So what happens though if we can't legalize marijuana?
The question is, what happens if we cannot legalize marijuana? Some other possible revenue sources or priorities in the state of Texas. As you all may know, the governor has increased spending on the U.S.-Mexico border by $3 billion over this last year. He's constructing a wall. He's activated 10,000 members of the Guard. And to each one of those members, we are grateful, because not only are they serving now, many served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Many were activated in 2017 during Hurricane Harvey and sent down to Houston. But what we're asking them to do now is to really be part of a solution in search of a problem. They're unable to interdict anybody, to arrest anybody. 4 of them have taken their own lives in the last 5 months. 2 others have died in accidental deaths, none of them killed by undocumented immigrants coming into this country. Let's return them to their communities, to their jobs, to their families. Activate them only if we have a true crisis. And in the bargain, we can direct some of that money into public ed, for example, or other pressing priorities where we really do have problems in the state of Texas. Thanks for asking.
All right, I have my last 2 questions right
Okay, great. Thank you for being here.
Where are you at on the Green New Deal in Biden's agenda?
So I want to make sure that we maintain our leadership as the energy leader, for the world, and that is oil and gas primarily. I mean, I drove here in a gas-burning van right now, and I love that the fuel that we depend on comes from the state of Texas, as do the jobs that support that. This state has secured this country's energy independence from the rest of the world. No more wars in Kuwait or Iraq to secure our supply lines. We're supplying it right here. And given the fact that Russia is invading Ukraine right now and jeopardizing Europe's energy supply because they rely on Russia, I would love for Texas to export liquefied natural gas that is produced right here in this state over to Europe and play a critical role in saving that continent again more than 70 years after World War II. But in addition, I want to expand that leadership by making sure that we're doing more in wind. As you all know, we lead the nation in the generation of wind power. Add to that solar. The 2 fastest growing jobs in America today are wind and solar jobs, geothermal, hydrogen, and battery storage. That's the way the world is moving right now. And one country is going to have leadership. It could be China, it could be the United States. And if it's the United States, I want Texas to be the leader for this country. It means energy independence. It means doing our job to confront climate change before it's too late. It means protecting oil and gas jobs in this state and in this region. And it also means that we have pride of place going forward globally for what we've been known for the last 100+ years, ever since Spindletop. So that's my energy vision for the state of Texas.
1 more.
Okay, and so as far as that goes, you know, we've got all these imports coming in from, like Biden wanting to use Venezuela or Iran, you know, leading terrorist over in the Middle East. You know, I mean, how many, the CO2 that those clunkers pump out, bring in all the oil over. Why can't the United States be energy dependent again and be the leading exporter for the whole world? Because we produce it a whole lot cleaner than anybody else. And what are your thoughts? Are you still trying to get rid of the Second Amendment?
So a couple questions in there, and I'll answer all of them. On the first question about Venezuela and Iran, you and I are on the exact same page. If that oil and that gas is going to be produced somewhere in the world, I want it produced here. As you said, we'll do it cleaner under stricter regulations that protect the environment, the soil, the water, the air, ultimately the climate. And we also want those jobs to be here, and we want to be independent of Venezuela. We want to be independent of Iran. So I'd love to see more production in America. I'd love to see it come from the state of Texas. And I agree with you, we have a great opportunity right now. I hope that we seize it. On the second issue about the Second Amendment, I mentioned my Uncle Raymond, who was the jail captain in El Paso. He also won the Sharpshooters Award in the department and was the family member who taught me and my two sisters how to shoot, and also the responsibility of owning and handling a firearm. And I think that's not unlike probably everyone here in this room. We all grew up with firearms for self-defense, for hunting, for collection, for sport, for whatever reason. It's nobody's business but your own. And I want to make sure that we get back to that responsible tradition of gun ownership and protecting the Second Amendment while doing a better job of protecting the lives of those in our communities. So some places where we may have some common ground. Universal background check, which ensures that anyone who purchases a firearm goes through some kind of background check. We don't have that in the state of Texas right now, and if you all remember from 2019, that awful shooting in Midland and Odessa, gentleman was unable to buy the gun from a licensed firearms dealer, so he bought the gun out of somebody's truck in a private person-to-person sale. In Texas, that's not covered by universal background check. He then used that firearm to murder people indiscriminately in his community. We have 4 of the worst mass shootings in U.S. history in this state just in the last 5 years. That's not who we are as Texans. We can do a better job. And last thing, this is one where we may disagree on this, or some of us may disagree, but last year the legislature passed and the governor signed into law something known as permitless carry. It allows anyone to carry a loaded gun in public without a background check, without any training whatsoever. And part of the reason that I'm really worried about that is we've had more members of law enforcement gunned down in the state of Texas than in any other state. And over the last 5 years, when we used to have license to carry law in the state of Texas, there were 35,000 licenses to carry requests denied because law enforcement deemed that person too dangerous to themselves or to others in the community to have a loaded gun in public. Now, every one of those 35,000 is able to carry right now, as are the tens of thousands who knew better than to ever apply for a license to carry because they never would have passed the background check. That does not make us safer. That is not part of this proud tradition that all of us are a part of. So let's get back to protecting the Second Amendment while making common sense decisions to protect the lives of our fellow Texans. Thanks for asking the question.
Yes, sir, and I hope you
This
don't
is-
change your view on the Second Amendment.
Yes, sir. Thank
This
you.
is our last question.
Yes, I'm the Wheeler County Democratic Chair. What's your thoughts on initiative and referendum?
I talked a lot about democracy today. And democracy is voting in elections. It's getting registered to vote. It's running for office, but it's also what we're doing in this room right here, peacefully exchanging views even when we don't agree. I would add to that initiatives and referenda, the ability for citizens to say, hey, this issue is important to me. The gentleman mentioned the opioid crisis and perhaps mitigating that by legalizing cannabis in the state of Texas. Right now, unless his representative or the state legislature or the governor agrees with him, he is powerless to affect the outcome of that. As we know in other states, if you wanted to raise the minimum wage, if you wanted to expand Medicaid, if you wanted to legalize cannabis, you as a citizen can get together with other citizens in a room just like this one, and through petition or initiative or referenda, you can bring that to the ballot box and allow your fellow Texans to vote on it. Vote it up, vote it down, let the chips fall where they may, but the citizens end up deciding. So I'm a big proponent of democracy, and I want that to work regardless of who's voting or what the outcomes are. And what you just described, I think, gets back to the heart of democracy in America. So I support the idea. Thanks for asking, and thanks for your service as the county chair. Appreciate it. Is that it, Ms. Connell? Okay, so Cynthia says that was...
Wait. Please. I've been waiting for somebody else to ask the question.
Sure.
Texas has become the leading state restricting women's right to their own body. I am so tired of angry men in Austin telling us how to live our lives. That's between me and the Lord. So what you can see it right here. This is beyond me. But the young women coming up, this is insanity. Trust us to know what to do and how to deal with it. You're throwing women under the bus.
Thank you for asking the question, being insistent that we address this issue. Seriously, that's how we get change. And agree with everything that you just said. To bring everyone up to speed, the state of Texas has outlawed reproductive health care freedom for the women of this state. They call it the heartbeat bill, and it says that an abortion is illegal after 6 weeks. Most women who are pregnant will not know that they are pregnant at 6 weeks. It may be much later. In fact, it will be for most of them. And not only has abortion become criminalized, but anyone who assists any woman in obtaining an abortion will now have a $10,000 bounty on their back that any American, not any Texan, any American from Maine to California can try to cash in on right now. And unless we think that this is about life, then let us think about this. This state is at the epicenter of a maternal mortality crisis. More women, more moms are dying in childbirth or after childbirth than in almost any other state or any other developed country in the world right now. And so what I want everyone to know is that as these reproductive health care clinics close down across the state of Texas, and almost every single one of them has, not only is it harder for a woman to access her constitutionally protected right to an abortion, but it's also harder to get a cervical cancer screening. It's harder to get reproductive health care help. It's harder to see a doctor at all for many women, especially in rural communities, given the fact that we're the least insured state in America. So this is a life or death issue, and it is completely out of bounds of anything else happening in this country today, and getting back to the proud traditions of Texas, out of bounds of anything that we've seen in Texas. There are people in this room today who are pro-choice. There are people in this room today who are pro-life. No one's going to talk anyone out of what they feel about this. We should respect that. Those are strongly, personally held beliefs. But we should acknowledge the damage done by this legislation right now. And you have my commitment as governor. I will do my best to overturn it and ensure every woman is able to make her own decisions about her own body, her own future, and her own health care. Thank you for asking the question and bringing that up. Appreciate it. Okay, we're going to hang out for just a little bit. For anyone who would like to say hello, and I'd love the chance to shake your hand. And if you're wondering why I've got this shamrock, we stopped in Shamrock, Texas on the way here for their St. Patrick's Day parade before we came over. And for anyone who's interested, we'd love to take a picture too and ask you to post that on your social media platform of choice. Thank you for hosting us in Canadian. This has been a wonderful conversation. We cannot wait to come back. Thank you so much. Gracias.